Let me start by welcoming you all. It's very good of you to join us. Some of you are watching now live, and some of you may be watching the recording later. But we hope that wherever you are and whenever you're watching this, that this will be an interesting and useful conversation. We've got a variety of people joining, currently 56 of us. And some of you may know Oxford, perhaps through our leadership development programs, such as Women Transforming Leadership or the Oxford Strategic Leadership Programme or other programs. Some of you may not know Oxford or may not know Oxford yet, but whatever your connection, you're very welcome. Some of you already know me. I am Kathryn Bishop. I'm an Associate Fellow, and I'm also the Programme Director for Women Transforming Leadership, one of Oxford's women leadership programs. Some of you may know Tracey, who is joining me. Tracey Camilleri. Hello, Tracey, welcome.
Okay.
Tracey is also an Associate Fellow and is currently, she is the Director and co-founder of Thompson Harrison, which is an organisation working in the leadership development space. And Tracey and I know each other very well, having worked on complementary leadership programs over many years at Oxford. And we hope that that's a good foundation for what we have called a conversation. And we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible within the confines of technology that's really designed for webinars. One of the ways we'd like to do that is to encourage you to put questions in the Q&A, but also to put comments and reflections and ideas, or indeed even answers if someone asks a question and you yourself have a response to it. So we'll try to use that to make it as interactive as possible. Because the topic of our time together is a conversation about community and communication. It's designed primarily, but not exclusively, for women leaders, and there may be both men and women joining us today. And the conversation is driven by and fueled by the recent book, The Social Brain, The Psychology of Successful Groups, co-written by Tracey Camilleri, Samantha Rockey and Robin Dunbar. And that's the sort of groundwork for what we're going to be talking about. But Tracey and I both agreed that this is absolutely a good time to have this conversation. A conversation about those elements. Tracey, we talked about this before. What would your view on that be?
Well, Kathryn, lovely to be here and lovely to be speaking with all of you as well. It is a good time. I think it's a really interesting time and it's a difficult time. I mean, I think the companies we work with, a lot of them are really rethinking the shape of work and rethinking how they come together, whether it's to have conversations or to create communities. And there's a sense that things weren't working actually even before the pandemic, but the pandemic's dealt a blow to our sense of community. You know, people are lonely, mental health issues are at, really high levels. There's a lot of conversation about AI, ChatGPT, that actually humans are somehow yesterday's issue, and we need to think about ourselves always in relation to something shiny new. And I think the young workers as well are struggling to get a sort of foothold. And so I think it's a really, really interesting time to be putting our imaginations and our collective intelligence into thinking about how can we create environments within which human beings thrive.
I was, one of the things I really liked in the book, whenever you read a good book, you underline bits of it. And one of the things I underlined was the phrase, COVID-19 was, if you like, creating a melancholy laboratory to teach us once again what we really value, and to remind us of the importance of human connection and of the group. And you've just been talking about some of the dawning realization of what we've been missing while we've been working remotely. You also talked about the way in which we are sometimes attracted to the new whereas actually there are things we still need to focus on, the sort of basic traditional human things. Say a bit more about that.
Well, the book that we wrote, I mean, goodness, there are lots and lots of fabulous books about teams and thriving teams. So we had three particular lenses. One, our co-author, Robin Dunbar, he of the eponymous Dunbar number, is an evolutionary psychologist. And we look through an evolutionary lens at what doesn't change about human behavior, what remains the same, and how can we be more conscious and understand more about working with the grain of that human behavior. The second thing we looked at was scale. People sometimes think, issues and challenges are just too big for them to engage with. Environments are just too large, and really thinking about what works in terms of the size of groups. And the third thing was thinking about environments. How do you create environments within which people thrive? And so we've been working with companies to design social strategies with the same kind of rigor that people design financial strategies or digital strategies or marketing strategies. It was the World Health Organization, I think, back in the 50s, when they defined the word well-being as mental, physical, and social health. And that third category, social health, has had much less focus than we argue in our book that it needs, both within organizations and also within society.
I completely agree. I think we do in organizations have a dawning realization of the importance of those aspects. I'm very struck by the number of articles I've read asserting that productivity was absolutely fine during the lockdowns and remote working. And it raises a question in my mind about what productivity is, about how you define it. If you're talking about the basic transactions of getting stuff done and the meetings that are necessary to get those things done, well then, okay, maybe productivity in many organizations was indeed fine and sustained. But if you have a wider definition of productivity that is not just about how the handle is turning now, but about ideas for the future, about organization and team culture, about releasing and developing energy in people, about the discretionary effort that good leadership often generates. It raises questions in my mind about whether those things have been sustained in the times that we are remote and apart. What's your view on that?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think, the kind of head down productivity is technology, economics, and, just getting tasks done faster. The hour-long meeting becomes every half-hour meeting. People are worn ragged by it. For me, productivity is also philosophy. It's also psychology. What are we doing all this for? One of the people we interviewed in our book was the wonderful historian Theodore Zeldin, and he said to me, what is the point of business? Is it not to create experiments so that for the next generation, things are better? There's more joy, there's more connection. And, he wrote an intimate history of the French people, and I think we don't give enough time to think about these things, and we don't put our attention to them. And I actually think, as you say, the sort of amazing human gifts of imagination, of being able to step conceptually into the future, to be able to learn on the shoulders of people who've gone before, all those things that actually, apart from the last one, actually, we're so down on ourselves. We can do this better than ChatGPT, we can invent and we can enjoy being together. So I think that question of productivity and how narrowly it's defined is a problem. And one that actually it needs people like the people on this call to actually take time to actually kind of to think about and to do things differently. And we've got such a brilliant chance now to do that. And by the way, please do put questions in the chat, not in the chat, in the Q&A. because Kathryn and I would love to respond to anything that you'd like to talk about.
Yes, we would indeed. So questions or comments, we'll carry on talking for a little bit more,
Yes.
and then we're going to stop and then cover some of those, and then we'll offer you some other thoughts. I also, like you, feel that there is a real window of opportunity right now to do some things differently, to think differently about some things, to revalue some leadership skills and qualities that perhaps we've taken for granted. But the window won't stay open forever. That's what I kind of feel. So there really is a moment now to seize on something. So from a leader's perspective, what difference does the research you've done and the thinking you've done make to what leaders do?
I think, back to my point about scale, I mean, all of us have had the experience of being in meetings that are just too big to be productive, back to this word productive. And sometimes those meetings are big for very good reasons. We don't want people to feel left out, but there's no point being in a meeting if you're not really in it, if you don't have a voice in it and you can't contribute, you're not part of it. So we looked very closely at sort of matching team size to task and what kind of leadership is needed at different sorts of scales. Have 5 people together. You don't really need a leader at that size, and those groups are great for creative projects, for crisis teams, and so on. But if you want to make decisions in the complexity that we all live in, you need difference, you need different perspectives. I mean, I'm not telling you guys anything that you don't know, but you really need good facilitative leadership at that point. And I think we don't teach facilitation skills, actually. We see leadership as being sort of broadcast, good presentations, but actually facilitating the voices of others. I see it again and again done quite badly. Once you get to 50, you start to need structure because of the way information passes around the system. And there's research on this in our book. So you start to need specialists and so on. And then once you get to 150, the Dunbar number, beyond which, given the size of our neocortex, given the length of a day, we can't really have real reciprocal relationships at any one time. And people say beyond 150, the weird stuff happens. And it's the point at which we becomes us and them. It's the stand on a chair number. And much beyond that, as a leader, you take on a symbolic function. People don't really know you. They project onto you their hopes and their fears. And what you do takes on a symbolic kind of heft as well. And you need to be aware of that as a leader. So there's the scale side of things. And then very quickly, and I'm aware we want to get to questions, but very quickly, there's also, actually, there are some really simple things we can do as leaders to work with the grain of our inherited psychology. I mean, one of the things we do, it seems very, very simple, but before we have a difficult meeting, we will eat a structured meal together. I say structured in the sense that it's not just grabbing a croissant, it's actually having conversations with each other. And what this simply does, breaking bread together, compane, the root of the word company, is create social endorphins. It creates foundations for trust and for, as you were mentioning, Kathryn, discretionary effort. We will hold workshops instead of workshops. It sounds a bit tinny and stupid, but synchrony again, it's why armies march. Walking together again creates social endorphins, those bonding mechanisms, laughing together. The best thing you can do, Robin is always saying this, the best thing we can do is sing together. And so, I mean, I don't know about you, Kathryn, but, on programs, people are always saying, oh, can we do karaoke after dinner? And I think, actually, the amount of connection you can get 40 complete strangers together, they feel like they are brothers and sisters for weeks afterwards if you get them to sing together for an hour. So there are some very simple things you can do, just working with what we need as human beings, our rituals, our stories, our ways of thinking and working and feeling.
You've outlined there, I think, the challenge for all of us in our day-to-day leadership, which is just to take this moment, just to reflect on whether you need to do something differently, to do more of something and less of others. We do want to get to questions, but Tracey, before we do that, is this the moment also just to talk about the Thrive model? Because one of the things that helps us in examining and shifting what we choose to do as leaders is to have a framework in our minds, a mental model, a heuristic, if you like. And the book does offer the Thrive model. So is this the moment to talk about that?
Definitely, yes. And Louisa, I don't know if you can put it up there. Yeah, that would be great.
There we go.
Just to say, we interviewed leaders in so many different environments, from, you know, conductors to government ministers, to entrepreneurs, and so on, really trying to understand what was it about the environment that was created that actually allowed people in groups to thrive. And it came down again and again to these 6 foundational elements that, if you have them in balance, actually create a foundation for people really to be their best selves, to be able to take risks together. And this isn't just about, and I know this webinar is about conversation and community, but it was also, we found, about performance and innovation and impact, you know, having the safety to be able to take risks together. So just very quickly, and you'll see here again, we've mapped onto this scale, and there is a sense, of course, almost like if you imagine throwing a stone into a pond with ripples going out, these things do get weaker as group size gets bigger. But, you know, and again, these are not things that you won't have thought about, but it's something about needing now to turn our time and attention to them, because they are not just happening. They're not just happening in the background. So purpose and values, sharing purpose and values, having work that's meaningful, a culture that's vibrant, you know, habits, ways of working, rituals, stories, shared sense of identity, all hugely important for people. Learning, you know, that opportunity to progress, to feel like you're being offered opportunities to stretch and to develop, hugely important for people. Connection, there's been a lot of research you've probably seen recently, and Robin's done quite a lot of it, about friendship and in the importance of friendship at work. If you have 5 friends in life, not just at work, 5 close friends, it's one of the key elements for health, for physical health, for recovery, and so on. So is there time to make friends and build bonds at work? And this issue of belonging as well, not feeling excluded, not feeling left out. We are next week going to be running a series of workshops at the V&A Museum in London, working with curators, thinking about, and the V&A is wonderful because it belongs to us all. You know, there are no thresholds there. We can go in and out without paying. And how can we think about how we create environments for belonging? So that's an exciting way, and we explore all of these in our work on developing social strategies. Thank you so much, Luda.
Tracey, thank you. You can find that model in the book, and I think it's a very useful way of kind of holding in your mind some categories of things to pay attention to think about, to reflect upon. Actually, as we move into the mid-session questions, it's also, I think, perhaps partly the answer to the question from Kat. Hello, Kat. I'd like to hear your views on innovation. And Tracey, you might want to say a little bit more about that, but I think there's something in that model talking about setting the context for innovation to flourish. I'm also struck by Lauren's question. Tracey, I'm going to come to you on this one as well. How much time should you spend being leading, and how much doing operational work? You and I have talked in the past about what the work of leadership actually involves. And I think this is a good time to have another look at that question. Tracey.
Should we begin with that one and go back to Kat? Because they're both great questions, Lauren. Yeah. How much time should you be leading and how much doing operational work, that push and pull, that everyone is under to get down to the task, get the work done. And I think, I think one of the key jobs of leadership is actually to build leadership in your team, and I think perhaps, can I say, we as women, I don't know, feel like we need to do more perhaps than we should. And one of the things, and I don't know if you felt this, Kathryn, on Women Transforming Leadership, I often felt like one of the key things that emerged from the Strategic Leadership Programme was just a little bit of permission to take half a step back, to do slightly less, and that changed the dynamic with the team hugely, and that people just stepped in, and it's a development opportunity, and took some of the weeds of one's job, so that you could actually, just breathe, have time to think, and look slightly more out into the middle distance than you might. The second thing to say is that there are micro opportunities to lead all the way through. I remember talking to Nairi Woods, who's the dean of the Blavatnik School, and she said, every decision you make is an opportunity, for example, to talk about your values. She said, we had a big problem about, should we give free coffee to the faculty or should they pay for it? She said, well, I could either say, yes, you can have free coffee because what we value is conversation, people coming together, sharing ideas, or no, because what we care about is the scholarship fund, and every single penny goes into enabling students who couldn't afford to come here. So that's a choice for me as a leader. It's a tiny thing, but I can reinforce my leadership as I go through the day to day. And so I think that sort of micro opportunities, but also maybe Lauren, trying to take half a step back and giving a little bit more of that leadership to your team, you might find really changes the dynamic in a positive way.
It's also true, just before we come back to the innovation point, it's also true that you and I have both talked in the past about how we typically undervalue conversation as a key part of the work of leadership. That actually talking with others, listening to them, exchanging ideas, testing and experimenting in conversation is actually a real part of the work. We sometimes think, well, I haven't done a spreadsheet today, so I haven't really done very much. Actually, if you have engaged in conversation, then you have been seizing those micro opportunities for leadership.
Oh, that's such a key point. I mean, we have this kind of idea of a little kind of Napoleon on our shoulders, that's what we should be doing when we're leading. Conversation is the tool of leadership. It's the key tool of leadership. And again, it's something women do really well, that reciprocal, back and forth. And I think too often conversation is seen as a sort of means of persuasion or a prelude to the real work. It is the work. And actually thinking about how you're using conversation to bring together opposites. Yes, to innovate, to have half a sentence where someone else has the other half, to find out the story beneath the story. I mean, there are so many uses of conversation. And I think, again, like facilitation, it's another thing we don't put enough attention on.
No, I think that's absolutely right. You touched on innovation there. Do you want to say any more in response to Kat's question?
Kat's innovation. I mean, absolutely. I mean, you can't take risks together. I think it's hard to innovate on Zoom. I think one needs to be in a room together. And maybe I'm old-fashioned. We during the pandemic, all of us had to try, but there is quite a lot of research showing that the ability to hear faint voices, our networks narrowed during the pandemic, and they also got diluted. They became more task focused. And that imaginative work that you're engaged with, it does require trust, psychological safety, time, being playful together, laughing together, trying things out, prototyping. And I think, thinking about group size as well, hugely important for innovation. So I think it's a great question. And I think it does very much link to what we're talking about today.
a good lot of questions coming up. I'm just going to pick on one about guilt. There is also the guilt. As women, I feel we have to work twice as hard to prove we're doing our jobs well. And in some ways, I hope we've kind of responded to that actually what we're doing right now is redefining what the job is. How would you respond to that one, Tracey?
Guilt. Why are we guilty? You know, I just very quickly, when I was the director of the strategic leadership program, we would have beautifully written, you know, submissions about, you know, what strategic challenges, what people are struggling with, and so on. And I'd always do a kind of an exercise for myself, taking off the names and the photographs and thinking, is this a woman or is this a man? And by the way, I mean, you know, I think about, you know, the kind of masculine and feminine as a continuum, you know, so it's not just women do this and men do that, but the feminine and the masculine. And what really struck me was that the wonderful, brilliant women leaders who came in the program located their strategic challenges largely within themselves. You know, I need to get better at this. I need to, you know, if only I could do this, if I need to do this. And the guys, bless them, largely located their strategic challenges externally. You know, it's the currency fluctuation, it's the supply chain, it's, you know, my board, it's this, it's my team, it's whatever. And I just thought that was so interesting. Why is it? That sort of guilt thing, and, you know, this, you know, penalty, that this likability penalty, that if we're strong and authoritative, you know, we're less, I mean, you know much more about this than I do, Kathryn, and, you know, that we're less liked. And actually, I think guilt is, we need to banish it. That's what I feel.
or turn it into fuel.
Yeah.
And just I mean, sometimes we often have this question about imposter syndrome. Actually, this one that hasn't been raised, but my answer there would often be similar to the conversation we've just been having about guilt, which is, if you can turn it into fuel, acknowledging that actually many people, both men and women, experience some guilt or some imposter syndrome. Acknowledge that it's the thing that makes you prepare well. It's the thing that makes you attentive. It's the thing that makes you listen. It's the thing that avoids you thinking, I know best, which is a very dangerous characteristic in leaders. So it's possible that just by reframing the guilt and learning to manage it a little bit, that it becomes fuel, not impediment.
Yeah.
A whole load of other questions about different leadership styles and working with leaders to move them from being the leader to being something more vulnerable, more humble. I'm certainly very struck by, over the last decade, the number of times we have conversations with leaders where we're trying to expose the idea that you don't need to be the person with all the answers. You just need to be the person with really good questions who will listen to the answers that your team or the organization have to offer. But what's your view on the shifts in leadership style? Perhaps a particularly post-pandemic thing, Tracey?
I mean, we have noticed it, I think, haven't we? I mean, we're so old, both of us, that we've noticed, you know, that there has been a really positive move, I think, for more reciprocal, facilitative, invitational leadership, where it's not someone standing on the deck and once more onto the breach. You know, that kind of leadership, I think, is much rarer. But I think, you know, what's interesting at the moment is that people are also thinking about the shape of their organizations. And I think hierarchy, you know, hierarchical organizations, and goodness, we are, it's one of the things we learned through our evolutionary research. We are hierarchical beings. We feel quite safe in a hierarchy. We like to be above someone, you know, but safely below someone. But those organizations that are looking at flatter structures, that depend upon the kind of skills actually that perhaps traditionally more feminine skills of collaboration, they're not necessarily win-lose environments. There can be win-win environments. that those people with those kinds of leadership skills are really being effective in those different kinds of structures. Maybe we'll come on afterwards to talk, Kathryn, about different communication styles that our research uncovered, which I think does connect as well to the masculine, feminine leadership styles that might be interesting for the audience.
Let's pick that up. Let's pick that up now. And as you say, certainly over the last decade of running Women Transforming Leadership, we have found ourselves talking much less about men and women, and much more about a spectrum of skills and styles that we might call masculine and feminine, acknowledging that all of us, whatever our gender, have a blend of those skills. I think what's interesting now, though, is if you look at the particular skills that seem to be both relevant and vital right now, they are often skills that women possess, and perhaps also skills that women undervalue. Do you want to say a bit more about that? Why is this a conversation that's good for women, if you like?
I think we have to have this conversation. I mean, just look at the world now. I think, we need the feminine in the room when these big decisions about wars and strife and, I know that sounds a big answer, but we desperately need the feminine, the as you say, the collaborative, the empathic, the ethos of care actually that women bring to things. And so I think it is an important conversation that we're having now. And I think also those sort of synthetic gifts of being able to bring things together. I think it's back to this, sort of win-win. I work a lot with the great Margaret Heffernan, and she said she did a book on women in leadership, and she said she was absolutely struck every time she went to interview a woman leader. There she was in a room with her team. And she said, well, we're all, you can't just interview me. It's all of us leading this ship. And she said it was just very different to the interviews with the guys, that sense of a collective, of the community that we're talking about on this call, that women seem absolutely instinctively to be able to marshal.
In the book, you talk about mentalizing. Say a bit more about this.
Yes, I was really interested in this. This is a skill that, and it particularly works in small groups. And mentalizing is this, back to this theory of mind, where we can hold in our mind the mind states of others. So I, Kathryn, can imagine what you are thinking and your motivations. Not all of them, of course, but if we were in a group of 5 or 5 or 6, we could all, I know what, Kathryn's thinking about, what Lurida's thinking about, what somebody else is thinking about. And we can move forward together without having to stop and go, okay, Kathryn, so what do you think? We don't need that reporting back. And you can move very fast. You actually don't need bureaucracy. You can move, these sometimes become maverick cells in organizations, and they can become dangerous, but you can do fabulous work, particularly creative work. And the research shows that actually women are better at this than men. And it struck me the other day, someone was talking about the great exhaustion, that how many women at the moment are just exhausted. And I thought maybe, that's the shadow side of our great gift, that we spend such a lot of time inside the minds of the people we lead, of our families, actually, and that it is cognitively exhausting work. I mean, that's why, in aggregate, the 150, it is a limit, because actually, relational work like this is exhausting. And so that, I don't have an answer to it, but made me interested that actually our great gifts are one, potentially not valued enough, by traditional means of evaluation of people, but 2, actually cognitively more exhausting than we'd previously thought.
And that too is a good way of reframing some of the exhaustion that we feel, which is to remind ourselves that sometimes it's part and parcel of something of a strength. As you say, it's the shadow side. Do keep putting questions and comments in. I'm keeping an eye on them, but I'm going to ask Tracey to talk about a couple of other things before we come back to the questions at the end. So do keep them coming. You touched earlier on communication styles, on the ways in which those differ between men and women, or can sometimes differ, and what that means for the work that leaders are trying to do right now. You want to say a bit more about that?
Yes, this was a really interesting piece of research for me. Robin looked at, there's quite a lot of research sociolinguists have done, but he looked at, for example, the patterns of speech in mobile telephone calls. Huge data source. Looked at also patterns of speech in mixed groups, single-sex groups, and so on. And what he found was, and we can even see this on this conversation, Kathryn, is as I speak, you're nodding your head, and there's a lot of kind of affirmative behavior where women talking to women, where we sometimes finish one another's sentences, or you will start a sentence with the end of my sentence. It's very affirmative of what I've said. There's even will make noises of, sort of, ooh, great, yes, or great, or, as we're speaking. And on the whole, guys don't do this so much. They tend to speak more in statements, and find that the kind of affiliative, linguistic patterns that we just engage in naturally are irritating, even when they're done by other men. Sort of they put them off their stride, irritating. And then when we come into mixed groups, when there are fewer women than men, women tend to withdraw, or they have to take on the speaking styles of men. And so it's like speaking a bit of another language. I always do a bit of an experiment myself if I'm speaking at conferences at the break time. I watch what happens to groups, and actually there are a lot of women talking to women and guys talking to guys, and there are some interesting studies. For example, I think it was 2017, you might have seen this one, the US Supreme Court, women judges realizing that they got less time for justice because they were interrupted much more than the male judges, and seeing that actually in the end this was affecting the judicial system. And it was the Justice Sonia Sotomayor that they set up a separate structure where what would happen was that anyone presenting a case could speak for 10 minutes uninterrupted. And this completely changed everything, because women were starting their sessions with quite a lot of politeness and so on, and immediately got interrupted. So I won't carry on, but there's a lot of interesting work around different styles. I think just being conscious is helpful.
Indeed, awareness, absolutely. I have a couple more things to ask you, but I'm just noticing on the comments, Heidi comments about shifting the leadership, sort of reactions to the perception of the right kind of leadership style to something that is much more empathetic and conversational. And I think, Heidi, part of my response would be you have articulated the challenge for all of us in all the work we do. But let me come to Tracey on that. What would you say about that? How do we shift the sense of what good leadership is to what is needed now?
I think we need to start at the bottom. Those of you leading talent in organizations, what are we looking for in our leaders? How are we evaluating them? Interesting, quite a lot of women entering the bottom of organizations. There are a couple of recent studies I looked at where their performance is absolutely, absolutely equal, but they're being assessed in terms of their potential less well than their male colleagues. So why is that? What are we looking for? How are we evaluating our young developing leaders? And how are we calling out the behavior of those leaders who may be rainmakers in our organizations, but quite frankly, their behavior is just, it's no longer what we're looking for in leadership? And how are we having the bravery to call out those sorts of behaviors? So I think it requires us really to think about how we're also developing leaders. How are we training them? What are we valuing? Where are we putting time and attention? So, I mean, it's not an easy one, Heidi, to solve. But I think, there are companies doing good things in this area. And, it's not something that gets solved overnight.
It also connects to the idea of the leader in some ways as an umbrella. So if you find you're leading a team in a context where there are those, let's call them slightly dysfunctional leadership behaviors, part of your responsibility is shelter your own team from that, and to create an environment, a subculture, a microclimate within your team where those more appropriate, more useful, connecting leadership styles can be valued. Yes, yeah, definitely. What else would you say is, so there are plenty of people listening to this event, either with us right now or listening online, who are going to finish the event and go off and get back to work, to their jobs. What would you say is a thing that they should take away and particularly pay attention to this afternoon or tomorrow? I'm loath in some ways to sum up so complicated and rich a discussion, but let me just ask you that question. What should I do next if I've listened to this and have found it stimulating?
Gosh, I think just be a bit more conscious about the environment within which you're working, down to micro things like, just the light, the shape of the space that you're in, the tables we work across, those sorts of things. We get really, really micro in how we design environments for thriving. I think the second thing, for any younger women leading, listening to this is, and older women, we have more power than we think we have often.
Absolutely.
We're good at knowing what we don't want, but actually just stepping across the threshold and saying what you want and why. It's amazing. Sometimes it's possible, it was there all along. And I think that sort of courage and confidence and self-value. Some of you have been on the strategic leadership program, and I always make little films of people who've been on and interview them, and then I send the films to people and say, is that okay to put on the website? And the guys again come straight back, yeah, great. And you don't hear anything from the women, and you think, oh gosh, maybe I've offended them, maybe they don't like it. And then you ring them up and they go, I just couldn't bear to look at it. I couldn't bear to look at myself. And it's as if we have this sort of idea of leadership. We've got to be perfect. We've got to look wonderful. I don't know what it is. And these are amazing women saying amazing things, and I think, what is it? So I don't know, this is me on a bit of a rant, but I think I'm not really linked to the book at all. But I think working with the grain and working against it sometimes. I actually think, not everything about being human is good. We are homophilic. We tend to like people like ourselves. We like people with a similar worldview. And as you go up organizations, people start to mirror you, and say what you want to hear. And actually working against the grain of that's important for leaders. You know, we need that people who are different, who think differently. We need to see disagreement as an asset, you know, that we can really work with and you can innovate around. So I think, you know, there are free riders in the system, you know. If we're not in relationship with each other, we try and get away with it, you know. So at times we need to work against the grain of our inherited human psychology. But so be more conscious, think about scale. Is your team the right size really? Are you really making the most of everyone's gifts? Do you have an environment within which everyone feels that they can be themselves, that they can thrive, they can bring their best work, that they can dare together and have courage? And then on a personal note, you know, what I already said, take one step back in terms of doing less and one step forward in terms of doing more for what you really believe in and what you want, because it's probably there waiting for you. I don't know if that's what you wanted, Kathryn.
No, absolutely. It seemed to me I shouldn't ask you a question if I didn't also have an answer myself, and my answer would be,
your answer would probably be better.
No, draw breath and notice, and actually try to find 5 to 10 minutes at least in every day where you are able to think and reflect, and just draw out solutions for yourself. Interestingly, on your other point, one of the things we talk a lot about in the Women Transforming Leadership program is the research on women talking about their own leadership journeys. And one of the 3 themes that emerges is this notion of self-acceptance. And it plays directly to your story about not wanting to watch oneself on video. That women CEOs, when they were interviewed, talk about the time, literally the time in their life when they decided to accept what they were with their strengths and their limitations, to accept that this is how they wanted to work, to acknowledge their values, and to be prepared to make the trade-offs that might therefore impose on them. And that notion of self-acceptance is very much a part of the point you were making, I think.
I think that's a great point to make, and I think none of us have all the gifts, do we? I mean, you know, we need other people, and I think actually that's another thing, is that too often we say, "Oh, Kathryn, we're going to promote her," but actually, you know, we are often successful as a result of, you know, the teams that we're in and the people who support us, and I think that you know, accepting what we're good at and also what we're less good at, finding people to work with where we actually become more than the sum of our parts. I mean, that's the dream. That's free energy. That's free productivity. If you can sit down with a team of people and be more than the sum of your parts. And so many teams are, you know, composed of highly intelligent, able people, but they bring one another down because they're not investing in these sort of social connective tissue that we've been talking about today.
And all these things, as you say, are relational and social and connective.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of our time, but let's pick up a few more questions and comments. Thank you all for various things. Somebody's posted a link to the book. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Melissa asks a question about when we were talking about the way in which men and women use conversation and talk. Is there any correlation about mentorship of women in the workplace when men traditionally hold the senior leadership positions and their natural draw might be to another male? Great question. I certainly am a little nervous about too many mentorship relationships where the male is the mentor and the female is the mentee.
I think it's a really difficult question, and I know, you know, lots of brilliant men who worry as well about actually thinking, goodness, you know, I look around, the whole executive team is pretty much male. We'd love to be mentoring, but there's a kind of a mismatch and a difficulty and a social difficulty about mentoring young women. So I think it's a wicked problem, actually. And it just points to the fact we need more good women in senior positions. And, but at the moment, I think it's a lot of companies are agonizing over your question, Melissa, and about getting it right.
It's another one of those moments where there are windows of opportunity open. And one of the reasons we have to find time to notice when there is an opportunity to lead in a different way, to promote different kinds of leadership styles, to construct mentor-mentee relationships that work differently. There is a moment.
Yeah.
All right, a good number of other questions coming up. Let me see if there are any more.
I mean, Linda's said, is there a community group online where these conversations could be continued? And this session is about conversation.
Yeah.
And I do think that, if you have community groups of like-minded women where you can actually, talk about these things and help one another, hugely, hugely, hugely important. And, those that you sometimes don't think you've got time for it, but actually being able to, to share stories, share experiences, give one another, the courage, is a great way to progress, I think. So it's a good question. I don't know whether there is a WTL online conversation or, but.
So there are all sorts of online groups for those who have been on a program, whatever it may be. But I think the question kind of articulates the challenge for all of us, which is to construct networks where you can learn from your peers, where you are learning from them, and actually they will be learning from you. We find that on our programs, don't we, Tracey, that we know very well that participants will absolutely learn from world-class faculty with all the PowerPoint, but they will also learn from each other. They will also serve, particularly, I think, on the Women Transforming Leadership program, they will serve as role models for each other. So the benefit of that network, whether face-to-face in real life or online, is so great to kind of justify and warrant each of us making the time to try to make those connections.
And they last for years afterwards.
They do. You can use them in so many different ways. And indeed, your book comments on the power of the group, the necessity of the group for all of us in order to be able to achieve the group in work, the group outside work, the group across organizations. Very good. Right, we are coming to the end of our time. Let me see that there are some other questions about leadership programs that are available, and you can find that information readily on the Saïd Business School website. Leadership programs for emerging leaders is interesting. So I don't know whether you mean young leaders just beginning to take on their leadership responsibilities, or in emerging organizations or emerging economies. I don't know that there is a great deal of research suggesting that things are very different. So there's an opportunity there to engage in conversations. Perhaps those of you listening might want to connect on LinkedIn and generate some of those conversations. Very good. There are a whole collection of comments and questions that we've not been able to respond to, but I would like to say that I do think we have had a wide-ranging conversation, and I hope that those of you who are with us today or watching this subsequently have felt some degree of connection, because that has been the subject for the conversation, and we've tried to make it the mode of the conversation insofar as we can. Tracey, anything else you'd like to say by way of a final word?
No, just it's been hugely enjoyable and some fantastic questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer every single one, but yeah, do connect with me on LinkedIn if you've got questions that I didn't answer. I hope it's been a useful conversation. It's certainly been an enjoyable one for me.
For me too, and we hope for all of you listening and watching. Thank you for being with us. We'll say goodbye now.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.